Welcome back to Dispensationalism Today. We've been reviewing in these videos the foundation of dispensations and why we would see the scripture through the eye gate of the dispensations. And in the last two videos in particular, we began to look at each dispensation individually. We looked at the first dispensation, which is the Dispensation of Innocence, a time period of undetermined amount of time, probably a smaller amount of time that represents the time of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And they fell and they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, leading into the second of the dispensations, which was the dispensation of conscience. You know, the book of Romans in chapter 2 and verse 5 speaks about the conscience of man. And what we know about that is that the conscience of man is sinful and will never lead us to righteousness. And so what God demonstrated in the dispensation of conscience was that man could not self-govern himself. That is, he couldn't have enough self-control to not be led into a life of sin. And so by the time we come towards the end of this particular dispensation, the man that we know as Noah, who found grace in the eyes of the Lord, was used by God to build an ark for the protection of both animals and humans to make it through the worldwide flood that he would send as a judgment upon mankind because of their failure to keep a godly lifestyle. Well, today we come to the third of these dispensations, and it's the time between the flood and the time of the call of Abraham, and so we call it the dispensation of human government. Now, like I've been saying in these studies, I mean, if you want a different term for it, or you'd like to combine one or two, that's perfectly acceptable to me. But what I see is that after the flood, God instituted truly a concept of human government. How do we know that? Because in Genesis chapter 9, the Lord gave Noah and his descendants the right to take the life of one who took the life of another. So in other words, he instituted capital punishment. Now, it's not my purpose for us to discuss the pros and cons and the rights and wrongs of capital punishment. But it's very clear that in Genesis chapter 9, God established the right of a human court to judge a person for murder, that they too should have their life taken. A bit different, by the way, than the judgment placed upon Cain for his murder. Well, human government then was instituted in this third dispensation after the flood because God wanted to test man to see if not only could they self-govern themselves like under the age of conscience, under the dispensation of conscience, but he wanted to see if they could gather together a group of people who could then lead people into a life of godliness. But like every other dispensation, what we see is that man is incapable of controlling himself to the place of being a godly person. And so what we read in chapters 8 through 11 of the book of Genesis is once again this failure, this falling of mankind further and further into sin. You know, in this third dispensation, the dispensation of human government, God begins to demonstrate that again, mankind will fail. Now, the interesting thing, and again, the account in Genesis chapter 11 that you might be familiar with is called the Tower of Babel. Now, the Tower of Babel was a time of unity, if you will, or solidarity, if you will, of the human race to build a tower probably to themselves. It said into the heavens, and I don't think it means they were building a tower into heaven as in the abode of God, but they were going to build this tower, and I think it was a tower of great prominence, of great pride, of their own abilities. And so mankind all came together in the area of Babel to build this tower. Now, there could be solidarity and unity because up until this time, from what we read in the scriptures, everyone spoke the same language. Everyone said whatever they said in a language that everybody understood. Wouldn't that be exciting in our day and age? I get the privilege to travel to other countries, and trust me, I only wish I could speak these other languages. Sometimes I get to go to Thailand. Pom pu pasa Thai nit noi kap. I speak a little bit of Thai. Now, if you speak Thai, hopefully you understood that. I can say Namaskar in Bangladesh to say hello. I like to joke. I can kind of say hello in a number of different languages. But when I go there and I speak English, very few people understand me. The same as when they speak Bengali or Tagalog or Thai, I don't understand them. And it all comes back to this account in Genesis chapter 11. The people came together and they were going to be so unified and so solid, they were going to have such a solid group together that they would defy God. Because you see, God said to spread out across the planet and fill the earth. Well, they weren't doing that. They were stuck in this one place. They didn't want to leave each other. And to the point that they were going to build this tower in memory or in memorial to themselves, in honor of themselves. Well, the Bible tells us that as they were building this tower, God said, I will go down and confuse their languages. And in this particular dispensation, then, what God is demonstrating is that mankind, even given the right to govern themselves as a human government situation, even that government itself could not control the sinful appetites of the human heart. Now, isn't it interesting when you think about the confusion of the languages? Have you ever been in a party somewhere, in a gathering, and they were going to play like a mixer game, and they put a name of an animal on your back, and then you looked at somebody else's, and there was this great noise and confusion because you were trying to find the other people who had your animal, and it was very hard. Well, imagine going to bed one night and you and your wife and your friends and your relatives, everybody, you all spoke the same language. Can you imagine waking up the next morning saying hello to your friend, your neighbor, maybe even one of your family members, and they didn't understand you? You were to say, hello, how are you, just like you always do. And they looked at you with confusion. Well, that confusion turned to fear. That fear turned to anger. And eventually then, everybody just went off their own way. And what they began to do, I think, was find people who spoke that language that now they were understanding. Well, that's what happened at the Tower of Babel. And God, during the dispensation of human government, was demonstrating to mankind that he could no more govern himself by his conscience than he could with government. And so in Genesis chapter 11, the human race then did spread out across planet Earth. They went all their different directions, north, south, east, and west. And yet for a third time, God demonstrated to mankind that he can't get along without a personal relationship with himself. So this dispensation only lasted about 400 years from the flood to Babel. It was a very short time period, but in that time period, they still failed the test. So in our next installment, we're going to look at the Dispensation of Promise. And the Dispensation of Promise will introduce us to one of the key characters in the entire Bible, certainly in the Old Testament, and very certainly to the Jewish nation. And his name is Abraham. So join me in my next installment of Dispensationalism today when we look at the Dispensation of Promise, when we look at Abraham and his descendants, as we continue to see the scriptures through the eyes of a dispensational perspective. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you the next time on Dispensationalism Today.